Advertising's reputation for not being truthful probably began with the first ad for snake oil in 1893. Back then, advertising was a new industry with no regulation. And even 60 years later, ads were allowed to say almost anything. While it's hard to believe now, cigarette ads would actually feature doctors to sell cigarettes. Unfortunately, false and misleading marketing messages continue today. And in more than one case, these false and misleading messages have contributed to a national health crisis. So when it comes to truth in advertising, there's certainly good reason to be cynical. On the positive side, thanks to improving laws and independent watchdog organizations, it's becoming harder for ads to lie. And the fact is, if a product is truly good, it's only logical for an ad campaign to be as truthful as possible. In my 30-plus years in the business, I've been involved with hundreds of campaigns for every type of product and service. And probably the most successful campaign I've ever worked on was successful because of how truthful it was. The product was a jam called Sorrel Ridge. At the time, I was freelancing and working with a new sales guy who heard the company was looking for an agency to do a TV spot. So we pretended we were an agency and got a meeting. When we sat down with the company owner, we learned that all jams are not created equal. He explained that all the major jams, like Smucker's, actually had very little fruit, less than 10%. The rest was corn syrup, refined sugar, and water. His Sorrel Ridge, on the other hand, was 100% fruit and fruit juice, which is why he wanted to get the word out with a great TV spot. And to help make sure it was a great spot, he told us he invited 5 other agencies to show ideas. The best idea would win the business. Then he told us one last thing. He mentioned that Tim Smuckers, the Smuckers chairman, had actually called him at one point, and the conversation did not go well. So he said if we wanted to consider an idea that went directly at Smuckers, that was fine by him. When I left that first meeting, my head was spinning. Over the next few days, as I thought about the meeting and the challenge, I was both excited and anxious. Certainly Sorrel Ridge was a great product, especially compared to Smucker's. But Smucker's was an iconic, well-liked brand. Their strong branding was built on positive images and down-home goodness. Their famous tagline, with a name like Smucker's, "It has to be good," had been around for decades and was one of the most memorable and loved ever. So I knew that going directly at Smucker's while an option could be suicidal. I had to figure it out before I could begin thinking of ideas. I was clear that the message had to be educational since people needed to know about the ingredients. I also knew that when your product is better than the competition, especially when the competition is well known, it's usually a smart strategy to name and compare them. It's really a matter of how you do it. So if we went after Smucker's, I just knew it had to be done right. If it came off as nasty or mean-spirited in any way, it could backfire. As I kept thinking, it felt like a David versus Goliath thing. Like we were the little guy fighting a giant. We had our one stone to throw and our aim had to be perfect. So the question I needed to answer was, what's the perfect target? With more thought, that became clear. It was the Smucker's tagline. Yes, it was famous and liked, but it wasn't true. Just because their jam was called Smucker's didn't mean it had to be good. My idea was to expose the tagline and turn Smucker's biggest asset into their biggest liability. Now I was excited. I quickly drew up a storyboard that focused on the Smucker's tagline. I decided it would open on the tagline, filling the screen as the announcer voiceover explained. For years, Smucker's has been telling us they have to be good, but in fact, their preserves are mostly corn syrup, refined sugar, and just some fruit. As each bad ingredient was mentioned, a pair of hands would pop up from the bottom of the screen and patch over the words, "It has to be good," with a less flattering line starting with, "It's probably good," then, "It might be good," and lastly, "Is it really so good?" The scene would then cut to a beauty shot of the Sorrel Ridge jar surrounded by fruit as the announcer continued. Fortunately, there is something better. Sorrel Ridge. We have 100% fruit juice, and nothing else. By that point, I only had time for a tagline. But what should it be? A day later, I had it. It would simply be a truthful version of the Smucker's tag. Sorrel Ridge. With 100% fruit, it has to be better. It was the perfect knockout punch to end the spot. A few days later, as we headed back to Sorrel Ridge to present, I was feeling confident, but also a bit anxious. After all, we were just two guys pitching against 5 other agencies. And while I did feel really good about the spot, I knew that if I didn't present it well, I could blow it. As we walked into the Sorrel Ridge offices, the owner didn't waste any time. "Okay, guys, let's see what you got." In my hands, I held multiple 8.5 by 11 cards, each with graphics and copy representing the frames of the spot. I would reveal them in sequence as I presented the idea. But before I did, I knew I needed to set it up with a simple explanation of my logic to go directly against Smucker's. We know how much people know and like Smucker's, so if we want people to choose Sorrel Ridge over Smucker's, we have to talk about Smucker's and make it clear exactly how we are better. That's what this spot will do, I said. And with that, I revealed the opening frame and began reading the voiceover copy. But before I could even finish the first sentence, the Sorrel Ridge owner abruptly interrupted. "Are you serious?" he shouted. "I'm spending $500,000 on this and you have it promoting the goddamn Smucker's tagline?" Caught off guard, I momentarily froze under the owner's glare. Then I responded, "The spot isn't promoting the Smucker's tagline. It's actually dismantling it. Let me show you." I quickly continued, and as I progressed through the spot revealing that I actually was dismantling the Smucker's tag, I could see the owner's expression change. In a matter of seconds, his expression transformed from a scowl to a Cheshire Cat grin. When I finished, he paused a moment and then spoke. "Wow, I think I love it." In that moment, it felt like a huge weight was suddenly lifted from my shoulders. My partner flashed me a thumbs up. We then discussed the spot, and the owner informed us it would need to be reviewed by his legal guy. At that point, I asked him a simple question. Did the spot say anything that wasn't true? He replied, "No, but I still need their opinion." As my partner and I headed back, it was hard not to feel excited. It was a great spot that the owner clearly liked. But its fate now seemed contingent on a legal review, and I knew from experience that lawyers always take the conservative path when it comes to anything even remotely controversial. But all we could do now was wait and hope. A few days later, the call came in, and not surprisingly, the lawyer did have concerns. We were directly attacking the very core of Smucker's and saying essentially they suck. As a result, he said there was a very good chance Smucker's would sue claiming disparagement. But he added, if they did, it would be a weak argument since we weren't making any false statements against them. Everything in the spot was true. Great, so let's do it, I responded. The owner wasn't so convinced. Just because they might not have a strong argument doesn't mean they won't sue, he lamented. After all, we are kicking them in the balls. And with lawsuits, it's not always about who's right. It's often about who's got the most money. I knew he was right, but I was dying. I created a spot that beat out 5 other agencies, was loved by the owner, and would probably put Sorrel Ridge on the map, and maybe even do the same for my partner and I. I had to say something. "You're right," I said loudly. "You are absolutely right. We are kicking them in the balls. And their lawyers may want to sue. But if Smucker's has a PR department, and I'm sure they do, they're not going to let that happen. What do you mean? The owner responded. I continued. Your lawyer just said it. The spot isn't saying anything that's not true. So if Smucker's sues and the press finds out, and they will, that Smucker's is suing a tiny competitor just for revealing their ingredients, from a PR perspective, how do you think that's going to make them look? Do you think they're going to want that in the press? I ended with a flourish. Hey, you should hope they sue. The owner said nothing for a moment and then concluded the call with, let me think about it. "24 hours later, he called us back. It was a go. And 3 weeks later, I had a produced spot.
For years, Smucker's has been telling us that they have to be good. But in fact, their preserves are mostly corn syrup, refined sugar, and just some fruit. Fortunately, there is something better. Sorrel Ridge. We have 100% fruit juice, and nothing else. Sorrel Ridge. With 100% fruit, it has to be better.
It was sent out to a half dozen TV stations, and then we all held our breath. The first week passed, and to everyone's great relief, not a word from Smucker's. Consumers, on the other hand, were responding, and sales were very strong. After week 2, there was still no word from Smucker's, and sales were up even more. As I suspected, Smucker's never did sue, and after the first month, sales were up a whopping 90%. The Sorrel Ridge owner was so thrilled with the results that when the 3-month TV media schedule finished, he came up with another $1 million to continue running the spot for another 9 months. The campaign success caught the attention of Forbes magazine, who did a great piece about it. It also got my sales guy and I some great press in some major media outlets, and suddenly, overnight, we went from total unknowns to being the Mavericks of Madison Avenue. As if all that wasn't enough, before the year was over, the campaign ended up in the Harvard Business Review as a case study. The success of the campaign was far beyond anything any of us could have imagined, and I'm happy to have been a part of it. I'm proud of the creative. I give the client credit for having the balls to run it, and now I have a good story to tell about what can happen when you combine a great product with an ad campaign that tells the truth.